Commander Hyanwu stretched his long blue fingers and cracked his neck as he settled into his command chair. The orbital station hummed quietly around him, its artificial gravity keeping his coffee mug firmly planted on the metal desk. Outside, the viewport stars drifted past like scattered diamonds against black velvet. He had been stationed here for 3 months now, analyzing combat footage from across the galaxy. The Velthary officer had earned his stripes the hard way. 14. Different war zones, from the crystal caves of Zarian Prime to the gas giant platforms of the Helix Nebula. He had watched the insectoid klaxons tear through enemy lines with their razor claws. He had studied the Zephyrian air cavalry as they swooped down on anti-gravity wings. It analyzed the methodical advance of the mechanical synthesis armies, their chrome bodies reflecting laser fire as they marched in perfect formation. Each species had their signature style. The klaxons were savage but predictable. The Zephyrians were graceful but fragile. The synthesis were efficient but inflexible. After 30 years of military analysis, Hyanwu could predict battle outcomes just by knowing which species were involved. Today felt different, though. His superior, Admiral Cathara, had personally delivered these files with an unusual request. The humans were applying for full military alliance status with the Galactic Coalition, and someone needed to evaluate their combat effectiveness. Problem was, nobody really knew much about humans except that they came from a small blue planet on the galaxy's outer rim. Probably another species that thinks they're tougher than they actually are, Hyanwu muttered, pulling up the first file. His computer screen flickered to life, displaying rows of video recordings from something called the Terran Vorthok War. The Vorthok name made him pause. He knew that species well. 7-foot-tall warriors with natural armor plating and 4 arms, each capable of wielding separate weapons. They had conquered 12 star systems before the Coalition finally stopped their expansion. If humans had actually fought the Vorthok and lived to tell about it, maybe they were worth a closer look. The first video began with static, then cleared to show a muddy battlefield under an alien orange sky. Plasma bolts streaked overhead like deadly fireworks, and the ground shook from artillery impacts. Human soldiers moved through zigzagging. Trenches carved into the red soil of Kepler-7. Their equipment looked primitive compared to Coalition standard gear, metal helmets instead of energy shields, kinetic rifles alongside their plasma weapons, and bulky armor that seemed to restrict movement. At first glance, they appeared unremarkable. Hyanwu had seen dozens of bipedal species that looked similar to arms, 2 legs, 1 head. There. Leader caught his attention, though. A tactical display identified her as Captain Mina, a human female with short black hair and intelligent dark eyes. She moved between fighting positions with smooth efficiency, checking on her soldiers and coordinating defensive patterns. Standard defensive doctrine, Hyanwu noted, watching her gesture to different firing positions. Nothing revolutionary here, but as he continued watching, small details began to stand out. When plasma fire erupted from the enemy positions, most species would either return fire or take cover. The humans did both, but they also did something else. They covered each other. Hyanwu watched as one soldier exposed himself to enemy fire just to pull a wounded comrade to safety. It seemed tactically unsound. The audio quality was poor, filled with static and the constant noise of battle, but he could make out fragments of their communications. Their voices remained calm, even as Vorthok warriors charged their positions. Tannic, no screaming, just steady professional chatter about ammunition counts and target priorities. Contact left 200 meters, covering fire on my mark. Someone get a medic to position 3. What struck Hyanwu as odd was their tone. It analyzed communications from dozens of species under fire, and they all showed similar stress. Patterns, higher pitch, rapid speech, shortened phrases. The humans sounded like they were discussing dinner plans instead of fighting for their lives. The scene that really caught his attention came halfway. Through the recording, a massive explosion erupted near the human lines, and when the smoke cleared, 3 soldiers lay motionless in a crater. Standard military procedure across the galaxy was simple. Mark the position for later retrieval and continue the mission. Wounded soldiers in active combat zones were a liability, but the humans immediately broke from their defensive positions. Two soldiers sprinted across open ground under heavy fire, while others provided covering fire. They reached the crater, checked each fallen soldier, and began dragging them back to safety. One was clearly dead, but they brought him anyway. Another was screaming and clutching a mangled leg, but instead of leaving him for the medical team, they carried him back. To the trenches, Hyenwoo paused the video and replayed the sequence 3 times. The humans had risked 6 lives to save 1 wounded soldier and recover 2 bodies. They had wasted ammunition providing covering fire. They had exposed their defensive positions. By every tactical manual he knew, their actions were inefficient and dangerous. Yet something about their coordination impressed him. They moved like they had practiced this exact scenario 1,000 times. No hesitation, no debate about whether the rescue was worth the risk. When one of their own fell, the entire unit responded instantly. He made a note in his analysis log. Unusual priority given to casualty recovery. Tactically questionable, but demonstrates unit cohesion. The recording continued for another hour, showing similar patterns. Humans sharing ammunition with wounded comrades who could barely hold a weapon. Soldiers refusing medical evacuation to stay with their units. A medic named Sujin crawling through enemy fire for 10 minutes to reach an injured soldier. He's getting shot twice in the process, but still completing the rescue. Curious behavior, Hyenwoo muttered, reaching for his coffee. Inefficient, but curious. He marked the file for deeper analysis and queued up the next recording. Not yet realizing he was about to discover something that would change his understanding of warfare forever, Hyenwoo rubbed his tired eyes as he finished his 3rd cup of coffee. The space station's artificial day cycle had turned the lights dim, but he couldn't stop watching these recordings. Something was deeply wrong with everything he thought he knew about warfare. The Battle of Ridge 7 had started like any other engagement. 12 human soldiers on a reconnaissance mission had stumbled into a Vorthok patrol base. The tactical computer showed the odds clearly: 12 humans against 50 Vorthok warriors. Any reasonable commander would have ordered immediate retreat or surrender, Sergeant. Daho had done neither. The helmet camera footage from Private Jinsu showed the moment everything went sideways. 1 second, they were moving through the rocky canyon. The next second, plasma bolts were screaming past their heads from 3 directions. The Vorthok had set up a perfect ambush, positioning their 4-armed warriors on the canyon walls above and blocking the exit routes. Were surrounded. Jinsu's voice crackled through his cum unit. They've got us boxed in, Hyenwoo expected to hear panic, maybe a call for reinforcements or evacuation. Instead, Sergeant Daho's voice came through, calm and steady. Copy that. Switch to close quarters formation. Watch your ammunition count. The humans didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They formed a defensive circle in the middle of the canyon and started fighting back with methodical precision. Hyenwoo watched in fascination as they moved like parts of a single organism. Each soldier covering specific angles while maintaining overlapping fields of fire. The first Vorthok charge came 20 minutes into the battle. The 7-foot-tall warriors leaped down from the canyon walls with their natural armor gleaming. 4 arms each carrying different weapons: plasma rifles, energy blades, sonic disruptors, and projectile launchers. Normal species would have broken. Under that assault, humans just fought harder. Daho took a direct hit from a sonic disruptor that should have shattered every bone in his left arm. Hyenwoo could see the limb hanging useless at his side, twisted at an unnatural angle. But the sergeant just switched his rifle to his right hand and kept firing single, precise shots. Each blast found its target, dropping Vorthok warriors even as they charged. Private Yunji's footage was even more disturbing. When the squad's ammunition started running low, she volunteered to crawl through enemy lines to reach a fallen Vorthok position where they could salvage energy cells. The journey should have been impossible. 200 meters of open ground under constant fire from elevated positions. She made it anyway. The recording showed her belly crawling over jagged rocks, plasma bolts burning the air inches above her. Head, a direct hit caught her in the shoulder, spinning her around and burning through her armor. She kept crawling. Another blast hit her leg, leaving a smoking hole in her combat suit. She kept crawling. It took her 2 hours to reach the Vorthok position, grab the ammunition, and crawl back. By the time she returned, she had taken 3 serious plasma burns and was bleeding from dozens of cuts. But she was still functional. She handed out the energy cells to her teammates and immediately took up a firing position. Medical status? Daeho asked over the comm. Still breathing, still shooting, Yoonji replied. And Hyenwoo could hear her gritting her teeth against the pain. The strangest part came when their advanced plasma weapons started failing. Most species would panic when their primary weapons malfunctioned during combat. The humans just switched to their backup kinetic rifles without missing a beat. The primitive projectile weapons were less accurate and had limited ammunition, but the humans used them with the same deadly precision. Private Taewon had been carrying an ancient-looking rifle that fired metal bullets instead of energy bolts. When his plasma weapon overheated, he smoothly transitioned to the kinetic weapon and started picking off Vorthok warriors with single shots. Each bullet found vital spots in the enemy armor, dropping the 7-foot giants one by one. But the pattern that truly disturbed Hyenwoo was what happened as the human casualties mounted. In every other species he had studied losing soldiers, degraded unit effectiveness, fear spread through the ranks, coordination broke down, and fighting efficiency dropped dramatically with humans. The opposite happened when Private Young Ho took a fatal plasma bolt to the chest. The remaining 11 soldiers didn't panic or retreat, they became more aggressive. Their rate of fire increased, their movements became more coordinated. It was as if losing one of their own had triggered some kind of biological response that made them more dangerous, not less. The medic Sujin exemplified this disturbing pattern. She had taken shrapnel to her side early in the battle, leaving her combat suit stained with dark blood. But instead of seeking cover or treating her own wounds, she spent the entire 6-hour engagement crawling between wounded soldiers under enemy fire. Hyenwoo watched her drag Private Minho to safety after. He lost consciousness from blood loss. She performed field surgery on Corporal Hajin's shattered leg while plasma bolts burned the air around them. She started tearing strips from her own uniform to make bandages, all while bleeding from multiple wounds herself. The battle ended when coalition reinforcements finally arrived 12 hours later. By then only 7 humans were still alive, and 4 of those were badly wounded. But they had eliminated 31 Vorthok warriors and forced the survivors to retreat. Hyenwoo cross-referenced the human reports with captured Vorthok communications, and what he found made his blue skin crawl. The Vorthok field reports described the engagement as psychologically disturbing and contrary to natural behavior patterns. One Vorthok commander had written, "The humans do not fight like rational beings. As their numbers decreased, their resistance increased. They show no fear of death and seem to become more dangerous when wounded. This is unnatural and disturbing to observe." Another report stated, "Request immediate transfer from human combat zones. Extended exposure to human fighting methods is having adverse effects on warrior morale. Many soldiers are reporting disturbed sleep cycles and reluctance to engage human positions." The Vorthok were warriors who had conquered star systems through sheer brutality. They had broken the fighting spirit of dozens of species. But somehow, watching humans fight was giving them nightmares. Hyenwoo leaned back in his chair and stared at the data streams flowing across his monitors. Everything he was seeing defied basic military psychology. Species were supposed to become less effective as they took casualties, not more dangerous. "What are these creatures?" he whispered to himself, watching Sujin treat wounded soldiers while her own blood dripped onto the canyon floor. The evidence was undeniable, but it made no sense according to everything he had learned about warfare. He was beginning to suspect that humans weren't just another species seeking alliance status. They were something entirely different. Hyenwoo had to stand up and pace around his office when he opened the Firebase Delta files. His hands were actually shaking as he read the initial battle report. 200 humans against 800 Vorthok warriors. The tactical computer had already calculated the expected outcome. total human casualties within 6 hours. It'd be 8 if they had exceptional defensive positions. The siege had lasted 18 days. Firebase. Delta sat on a rocky plateau overlooking the main supply route to the human colonies on Kepler-7. It wasn't much to look at. It's just a collection of prefabricated buildings surrounded by defensive walls and weapon emplacements. The strategic value was obvious, though. Whoever controlled that position controlled the entire sector. Lieutenant Colonel Jin-Ho had been inspecting the perimeter defenses when the Vorthok assault began. The first wave hit like a tsunami of violence, plasma artillery raining down from orbit while ground forces swarmed up the plateau from 3 directions. The opening barrage should have wiped out half the human defenders instantly. Instead, it seemed to make them angry. Hyen-Woo watched the security footage from the command bunker as Jin-Ho limped between defensive positions, coordinating the response. Despite a broken leg and what the medical scanner indicated were 3 cracked ribs, most commanders would have retreated to a safe location to direct the battle. Jin-Ho stayed on the walls with his soldiers, plasma rifle in hand. "Sir, you need medical attention," Sergeant Boyra insisted over the comm channel. "I need this position." "Held," Jin-Ho replied, firing controlled bursts at advancing Vorthok warriors. Medical attention can wait. The first day set the pattern for everything that followed. Wave after wave of Vorthok assault troops threw themselves at the human defenses, expecting to overwhelm them through sheer numbers. Each attack was met with disciplined fire and coordinated counterattacks that sent the survivors retreating down the plateau. Corporal Hai-1 became the symbol of human endurance during those first critical days. She operated the main artillery cannon, a massive plasma projector that required constant manual targeting and ammunition loading. The weapon was designed for a 3-person crew, but casualties had left her working alone. For 6 straight days, she never left her position. Hyun-Woo watched the time-lapse footage in fascination. Other soldiers brought her food and water, but Hai-1 stayed at her post, tracking targets and firing the heavy weapon with mechanical precision. Her eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion, her hands shaking from fatigue, but every shot still found its mark. Hai-1, "You need rest," Jin-Ho ordered over the Commande 4. "Who's going to work the gun?" she replied, adjusting the targeting scope. "I'm fine, sir." She wasn't fine. The medical readouts showed dangerous levels of sleep deprivation and dehydration. But she kept firing, turning Vorthok assault formations into scattered debris with each blast from her cannon. The turning point came on day 7 when a Vorthok bombardment destroyed the medical bay. Hyen-Woo expected this to break human morale, losing their primary medical facility during a siege. Should have been devastating. Instead, something incredible happened. The wounded soldiers left their beds and grabbed weapons. Private Sungmin had lost his left arm to shrapnel 2 days earlier. When the medical bay collapsed, he picked up a rifle with his remaining hand and took position on the eastern wall. Corporal Mi-young was supposed to be recovering from severe burns across her back, but she crawled to a machine gun nest and started providing covering fire for rescue teams. The footage showed dozens of injured humans abandoning their treatment to rejoin the fight. Some could barely walk, others were missing limbs, but they all found ways to contribute to the defense. The scene that broke Hyen-Woo's understanding of warfare completely happened on day 12. Private Taemin was manning a section of wall. When a Vorthok assault team blasted a hole through the defensive barrier, standard doctrine called for immediate fallback to secondary positions. When the perimeter was breached, Tae-Min didn't fall back, stepped into the breach. For 4 hours, he held that gap alone against waves of Vorthok warriors trying to pour through. The helmet camera footage showed him firing his rifle until the barrel overheated, then switching to a sidearm. When that ran out of ammunition, he used his combat knife. When a plasma round punched a hole through his chest armor, he kept fighting. Wound should have been fatal. The plasma bolt had burned through his lung, and Hyen-Woo could see pink foam on his lips, indicating internal bleeding. But Taemin stayed in position, using the wall rubble as cover while picking off Vorthok warriors with single precise shots. "Taemin, fall back for medical treatment," Biora called over the comm. "Can't leave the breach," he replied, his voice wet with blood, but still steady. They'll get through. He held that position until reinforcements arrived, then collapsed. The medical team found him still gripping his rifle, unconscious but alive. The Vorthok reports from this period made Hyenwoo's blood run cold. Their field commanders were filing increasingly disturbed communications back to their fleet. Day 8. Human resistance continues beyond projected parameters. Casualties mounting, but defensive effectiveness not degraded. Day 10. Multiple confirmed kills on humans who continued fighting with fatal wounds. This is contrary to biological possibility. Day 14. Request immediate reinforcements. Human defenders show no signs of surrender despite impossible conditions. Several assault teams have refused to attack human positions, citing unnatural behavior patterns. One Vorthok commander had written a report that Hyenwoo read 3 times. The humans do not fight like living beings. They refuse to acknowledge death and continue combat operations beyond biological limitations. I have witnessed warriors with punctured organs maintain defensive positions for hours. Their medics crawl through killing fields to retrieve fallen comrades, taking multiple wounds in the process but never stopping. This is not warfare. This is something else entirely. The most disturbing footage came from Day 16, when Sergeant Biora attempted to retrieve wounded soldiers from no man's land between the human walls and Vorthok positions. The area was swept by constant crossfire, making movement suicidal. She went anyway. The recording showed her crawling across broken ground for 6 hours. Moving from crater to crater while plasma bolts burned the air around her, she found 3 wounded humans and began dragging them back one by one. Each trip took 2 hours and exposed her to devastating enemy fire. On her second trip, Vorthok sniper put a plasma round through her shoulder. She kept crawling. On the third trip, shrapnel from an artillery blast opened up her leg from knee to ankle. She kept crawling by the time she finished the rescue. She was bleeding from 8 different wounds and had to be carried back to the medical station. But all 3 soldiers survived because of her efforts. The siege finally ended on Day 18, when Vorthok morale completely collapsed. Despite having 4 times as many soldiers, despite controlling the high ground, despite having superior weapons and equipment, the Vorthok commanders ordered a retreat. Their final report was a single line. Human position cannot be taken by conventional assault. Recommend orbital bombardment or withdrawal. They chose withdrawal of the original 200 human defenders. Only 43 were still alive when coalition reinforcements arrived. They had inflicted over 600 casualties on the Vorthok force, a kill ratio that should have been mathematically impossible. Hyenwoo sat in his chair staring at the final casualty reports. His blue skin pale with shock. The humans had lost, technically. Firebase Delta had fallen after 18 days of siege, but they had fought so ferociously that their enemies, warriors who had conquered star systems, had fled rather than face them again. The last piece of footage showed Jinho lying in the ruins of the command bunker, his broken body finally giving out after 18 days of constant battle. His final words were recorded by his helmet camera. "Good job, everyone. We held them long enough." They weren't soldiers, Hyenwoo realized. They were something far more dangerous than that. Hyenwoo couldn't sleep after watching the Firebase Delta recordings. For 3 days he paced his quarters aboard the space station, trying to make sense of what he had witnessed. Every military manual, every tactical doctrine he had studied in 30 years of service said the same thing. The humans should have been defeated quickly and decisively, but they weren't. Finally, he made a decision that would change everything. He accessed the restricted anthropological database, using his intelligence clearance to pull up classified files on human evolution and psychology. What he found in those ancient databanks made his hands tremble as he read. The first file opened, with a simple title, Species Profile, Homo sapiens terran. The introduction seemed innocent enough. Humans were bipedal mammals from a small planet called Earth, located in what the galaxy considered a backwater system. Average height 1.7 meters. Average lifespan 80 standard years, no natural weapons or armor. They looked weak compared to most galactic species. But as Hyenwoo dug deeper into their evolutionary history, the terrifying picture began to emerge. Humans had evolved as persistence hunters on the African savannas of their homeworld. Like other predators who relied on speed or strength for quick kills, early humans had developed a different strategy entirely. They would track prey animals for days, sometimes weeks, never stopping, never giving up, till their target collapsed from pure exhaustion. The report described something called pursuit predation, a hunting method so relentless that it had shaped every aspect of human biology. Their cardiovascular system was designed for sustained effort over incredible distances. Their skeletal structure could absorb punishment that would cripple other species. Most importantly, their brains were wired to completely ignore pain and fatigue when the survival of their group was at stake. Hyenwu read about something called the mammalian diving reflex that let humans function with reduced oxygen to their organs. He learned about redundant biological systems that kept them operational even with severe injuries. Their bodies produced natural painkillers during stress that were more powerful than most medical drugs. But the psychological profile was what truly chilled him to his core. The file described pack bonding behavior that went far beyond what any other known species exhibited. Humans didn't just protect their immediate family groups, they would die for complete strangers if they perceived them as part of their extended pack. And the terrifying truth was that modern humans considered their entire species to be one massive pack. Protective altruism, the report called it. The biological imperative to sacrifice individual survival for group protection, triggered by perceived threats to pack members. Captain Mina hadn't been making tactical errors when she risked her soldiers to save wounded comrades. She was following programming that had been hardwired into human DNA for millions of years. When one of her pack was in danger, her brain literally shut down self-preservation instincts and redirected all resources toward rescue operations. Sergeant Deho's squad hadn't fought harder when surrounded because of superior training. They fought harder because that's what humans did when their pack was threatened with extinction. The more desperate the situation became, the more their ancient survival mechanisms took control. Hanwu found a psychological study that made his blood freeze. Human soldiers in hopeless situations didn't experience normal fear responses. Instead, their brains released chemicals that made them feel calm, focused, and completely fearless. They entered what the researchers called a berserker state, where pain became irrelevant and death became acceptable as long as it served the pack. Private Taman holding that breach for 4 hours with a hole in his chest wasn't heroism, it was biology. His human brain had calculated that letting the enemy through would endanger his pack, so it simply turned off the parts of his nervous system that would normally make him retreat from fatal injuries. The files contained recordings from human colonies during natural disasters, and the footage was eerily similar to the combat videos. Humans running into burning buildings to save strangers, humans diving into floodwaters to rescue people they had never met, humans sharing their last food with injured neighbors during famines. Every single time, the same pattern emerged. When humans perceived a threat to their extended pack, individual survival became irrelevant. The most disturbing section of the report dealt with something called escalating group defense. Most species became less effective as they took casualties, but humans showed the opposite response. As pack members were killed or wounded, the survivors became more aggressive, more coordinated, and more willing to take risks. It was an evolutionary adaptation that had helped small human tribes survive against much larger predators. When the pack was being destroyed, the remaining members would enter a frenzied state designed to either save the group or die trying. There was no middle ground. Hyanwu cross-referenced this with the Vorthok reports, and everything suddenly made perfect sense. The enemy commanders hadn't been fighting soldiers, they had been fighting a species that had weaponized evolution itself. Every human behavior that had seemed tactically unsound was actually the result of millions of years of natural selection. Sergeant Biora, crawling through enemy fire to rescue wounded soldiers, wasn't following military doctrine. She was following genetic programming that had kept human tribes alive. When surrounded by saber-toothed tigers and other apex predators, Corporal Haiwan, staying at her artillery position for 6 days without sleep, wasn't dedication to duty. It was her human brain recognizing that abandoning her post would endanger the pack. So it simply shut down the biological processes that would normally force her to rest. The wounded soldiers leaving their medical beds to grab weapons wasn't heroic determination. It was the pack defense response, overriding individual survival instincts when the group faced extinction. The report included psychological profiles from captured human prisoners of war, and their responses had terrified their interrogators across the galaxy. Humans didn't break under torture the way other species did. Pain and fear didn't make them. Betrayed their comrades, it made them more determined to protect them. 1. Orthoc interrogator had written, "The human subjects show no normal fear responses. Physical pain seems to strengthen their resolve rather than weaken it. They speak of as their fellow soldiers as family members, showing emotional attachment that extends beyond rational military loyalty. Recommend termination rather than continued interrogation. These creatures cannot be broken by conventional methods." Hyenwu sat back in his chair, his blue skin pale with horrified understanding. The humans weren't superhuman. They weren't using advanced technology or secret training techniques. They were simply being human, and that was the most terrifying thing in the galaxy. Species that had evolved to hunt mammoth-sized prey by chasing them until they collapsed from exhaustion. A species that had survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and asteroid impacts by never giving up, never surrendering, never abandoning their pack members. A species that considered every other human to be family worth dying for. The Vorthok had conquered 12 star systems through superior firepower and ruthless tactics. But when they faced humans, they hadn't been fighting an army. They had been fighting a force of nature that had been perfecting the art of survival warfare for millions of years. And the humans were just getting started. Commander Hyenwu sat at his desk for 3 hours, staring at a blank report screen. His coffee had gone cold, his blue hands were shaking, and his mind kept replaying the impossible scenes he had witnessed over the past week. How do you write a military analysis that would fundamentally change how the galaxy viewed warfare itself? Outside his viewport, the stars looked different now. Each point of light might harbor a civilization, and somewhere among them was a small blue planet called Earth. The thought made him shiver. He began typing slowly, choosing each word carefully. Classification, maximum security, distribution, coalition high command only, subject, human military capability assessment, Terran Vorthok conflict analysis, recommendation, grant humanity full alliance status immediately. It's not because they require our protection, but because we require theirs. Hyenwu paused, knowing that single sentence would send shockwaves through the coalition leadership. He had seen their preliminary discussions about humanity. Most commanders viewed them as another primitive species seeking protection from galactic threats. They had no idea what they were dealing with. He continued typing, his fingers finding rhythm as the words flowed. Analysis of human military capabilities reveals a species that has weaponized evolution itself. They do not fight as individuals. Seeking survival, they fight as a collective organism, defending itself from extinction. Standard military doctrine assumes soldiers will retreat when casualties become unsustainable. Humans become more dangerous as losses mount. The next section was the hardest to write. How do you explain to career military officers that everything they knew about warfare was wrong? That there was a species out there that treated death as an acceptable outcome as long as it protected their comrades? Detailed analysis. The human response to combat stress defies all known psychological models. Observed behaviors include continued operation despite fatal injuries, voluntary exposure to certain death for comrade retrieval, and escalating aggression in response to mounting casualties. These are not trained responses, they are evolutionary adaptations. Hyenwu included specific examples, knowing the coalition leadership would demand evidence for such extraordinary claims. He wrote about Private Yunji crawling through plasma fire for 2 hours to retrieve ammunition, taking 3 direct hits but never stopping. He described how this wasn't heroism or training, it was genetic programming from millions of years of persistence hunting. Subject Yunji exhibited typical human pack protection behavior. Her brain literally shut down self-preservation instincts, when pack members were threatened. This response is hardwired into human biology and cannot be countered through conventional psychological warfare. He detailed Sergeant Bior's rescue missions, explaining how she had risked death repeatedly for soldiers she barely knew, because humans couldn't conceive of abandoning pack members. The report described her crawling through enemy fire for hours, taking multiple wounds, but never once considering retreat. Human pack bonding extends beyond family units to encompass entire military formations and ultimately, their entire species. They will die for complete strangers if they perceive them as pack members. This creates military units with unprecedented cohesion and resilience. The section on Lieutenant Colonel Ginho was particularly difficult to write. Hyenwu described how the human commander had led from the front with broken bones and internal injuries. It's not because of duty or honor, but because human pack leaders were biologically programmed to protect their people at any cost. Human leadership structures are not based on hierarchy, but on protective instinct. Leaders who fail to protect their subordinates face psychological consequences that can be literally fatal. This creates command structures where officers will die before abandoning their soldiers. As he wrote, Hyunwoo realized he was documenting something that would terrify every military commander in the galaxy. The humans weren't just tough soldiers. They were a species that had turned warfare into a survival trait. Tactical implications. Human military units do not degrade with casualties. They become more effective. Wounded humans will continue fighting beyond biological limits. Medical evacuation of human wounded should be considered a tactical advantage for the enemy, as injured humans often become force multipliers rather than liabilities. The Vorthok reports provided the most compelling evidence. Hyenwu included direct quotes from enemy commanders describing human resistance as psychologically disturbing and contrary to natural behavior patterns. He detailed how multiple Vorthok units had requested transfers away from human sectors. It's not because of military defeat, but because watching humans fight was giving their warriors nightmares. Enemy assessment. Vorthok military reports consistently describe human combat behavior as unnatural and psychologically disturbing. Multiple enemy commanders have reported adverse effects on their own troop morale after extended exposure to human fighting methods. This suggests that human combat behavior serves as a form of psychological warfare, even when not intended as such. The warning section was the most important part of the entire report. Hanwoo wanted to make sure every coalition leader understood exactly what they were dealing with. Critical warning to all coalition members, any species considering conflict with humanity should understand they are not planning to fight an army. They are planning to fight a force of nature that has been perfecting survival warfare for millions of years. Humans consider death in defense of others to be the highest honor. They will not surrender, they will not retreat, and they will not break under pressure. He included casualty projections that made his blood run cold. Based on the Terranvorth conflict ratios, humans could potentially inflict devastating losses on any attacking force, even if ultimately defeated. The Firebase Delta siege had demonstrated this clearly. 43. Human survivors had extracted over 600 enemy casualties before their position finally fell. Strategic assessment. Humanity represents the most dangerous potential enemy, or the most valuable potential ally in known galactic history. Their military effectiveness is not based on technology or training, but on evolutionary biology. They cannot be defeated through conventional means because they do not respond to conventional pressures. As he neared the end of the report, Hyenwu found himself thinking about all the humans he had watched through the camera feeds. Minna organizing defensive positions while plasma fire erupted around her. Daeho fighting with a shattered arm. Yunji crawling through hell to save her comrades. Sujin treating wounded soldiers while bleeding from her own injuries. Personal assessment. I have analyzed military conflicts across 14 different sectors involving dozens of species. I have never encountered anything comparable to human combat behavior. They fight not for conquest, not for resources, not even for survival in the traditional sense. They fight for each other. He paused, considering his final recommendation. This was the decision that would define the rest of his career and possibly the future of the coalition itself. Personal request. I formally request immediate assignment to any sector where humans serve as coalition allies. Under no circumstances do I wish to serve in any capacity that might place me in opposition to human forces. Having studied their capabilities extensively, I believe such an assignment would be tantamount to a death sentence. Hien Wu attached all the video files, combat recordings, and psychological profiles to the report. The data package was massive. Hundreds of hours of footage that would probably be studied by military analysts for years to come as he prepared to submit the report. He made one final addition. Conclusion: the galaxy contains species that fight for conquest, species that fight for resources, and species that fight for survival. Humanity represents something entirely different, a species that fights for love. This makes them either the most dangerous enemy or the most valuable ally in galactic history. He hit the submit button and leaned back in his chair, knowing he had just changed everything. Somewhere in Coalition High Command, generals and admirals were about to learn that their understanding of warfare was obsolete. The humans were coming. To the galactic stage, nothing would ever be the same. His computer chimed with an immediate response from Admiral Cathera. Report received. Emergency session called for 0800 tomorrow. Okay, all department heads required. Bring everything. Hien Wu smiled for the first time in days. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn what it meant to have humans as allies, and more importantly, what it would mean to have them as enemies. The end.